So, as I said, today we are going to do a Dharma day, but we're going to do something a little bit different. Because of what I'm going to be teaching you with this Lectio Divina, it's appropriate that we sit first. We're going to have a shorter sit, so I have a little bit more time to go over the practice with you. So let's get ready, please. Let's set your phones on Do Not Disturb, get ready for your posture. We're going to do a shorter sit today, so we have more time for the Lectio. So we're going to do a 10-minute sit right now, please. Okay. So we will begin when I say begin. Begin. All right, let's begin. So Lectio Divina is a practice. It is a spiritual practice that you should incorporate into your ecology of practices to complement the meditation and contemplation. And later we'll, of course, have the flow exercises as I bring in some moving practices for you. This is the way in which you should approach Dharma. So I'm just going to hold up some books first. Here's a book by the first book. The first books are from the Christian tradition. It's hard to get books outside of it. I'll show you at least one. This is this book on Lectio Divina, Renewing the Ancient Practice of Praying the Scriptures. It's by Basil Bennington. It's good. This one is particularly good. Sacred Reading. Okay, so it's The Ancient Art of Lectio Divina by Michael Casey. Also really, really, really good. Here's the original classic for this by Guido E. Ladder of Monks and 12 Meditations. I don't recommend reading this first. I recommend reading reading the other two books and then reading this book, because this will be a little bit obscure, removed. If you want a book that talks about Lectio from a non-Christian tradition, from the Neoplatonic tradition, there's a lot of discussion in here in this book by Kupperman. This is the book called Living Theurgia. Theurgia is a practice with a set of practices within Neoplatonism. In connection with that, for those of you who are interested, for when we are going to do the Wisdom Sangha, a book that will incorporate all of these things together so that we can recover the wisdom tradition of the West. As I continue to teach you the wisdom traditions from the East, Buddhism, Taoism, we're going to take a look at this important book. Okay, this very important book, written by another cognitive scientist, Bruce McLennan. This is called The Wisdom of Hypatia, and this is discovering the spiritual secrets of ancient philosophy. In connection with that, if you can, these are for down the road, but I thought I'd mention it now. Get two books by Arthur Verse Lewis, who I highly recommend. One is The Perennial Philosophy by Arthur Verse Lewis, and the other is Platonic Mysticism by Arthur Verse Lewis. So Lectio Divina, as you're no doubt seeing, comes out of the Neoplatonic tradition. It gets taken up, of course, within the Neoplatonic strand of Christianity. Neoplatonism, as Arthur Verse Lewis argues, is basically the spiritual grammar of the Western wisdom traditions. One more book now for specifically that you need to get in conjunction with the Lectio Divina, because this is the virtue that we are cultivating in Lectio Divina. This is the excellent book by Paul Woodruff, Reverence. It's called Reverence, Renewing a Forgotten Virtue. Reverence, Renewing a Forgotten Virtue. Okay, so that's some background. All right, so I recommended you get a poetry book and a prose book. I'm going to first now always make sure you've done meditation and or contemplation, prajna, before you do the Lectio. You have to get into the proper state of receptivity. So remember, read these texts whenever you wish, of course, outside, but now we're not reading for information, we're reading for transformation. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the 4 stages. I'm teaching you sort of a secularized version of Lectio Divina that will resonate with both the Neoplatonic traditions and with the Christian traditions. And if you want to take this up as a specifically Christian practice, because you're Christian or you want to renew Christianity, I hope you'll find this helpful nevertheless. So there's 4 stages what we're going to go through. So first of all, I'll say what each stage is, and then we'll go through them, and I'm going to review this a lot this week, okay? Now, when I'm doing it, I'm going to be doing it as if I'm doing it for myself. So you have to understand that I'm not doing it with you in the sense that I'm expecting you to have the same reactions that I'm having. I'm modeling it to you so that as soon as we're done today, do another quick sit, maybe 5 minutes, and then with the 2 texts that you have chosen, take the practice up for yourself. Okay? All right. So what are the 4 stages? So the first one is enacted engagement. So what that means is enacted engagement. You're going to read the text, and you're going to read the text with an attitude of reverence, and you're going to read the text with the intention of resonating with the text. You may actually say to yourself, "May I resonate with this text?" And what you're doing is you're reading for transformation. You're going to read aloud. You're going to read as if almost as if somebody else was reading it to you, and you were trying to open it up from it, that there is something in here to be disclosed to you that you haven't seen before. You're reading for transformation. So you're really engaging it. What does that mean? When you read, you look for what is salient to you. Don't try and explain why. Don't theorize. Something will jump out at you. Something will be catchy for you, even if it moderately. Sometimes it will be strong. Sometimes it will be moderate, right? So try to know what catches you, what's salient to you, okay? So you're reading in this reverential, and then you're doing this enacted engagement, and then you do embodied emotion. Okay, so pick up the phrase that caught you, right? That's salient. Start repeating it to yourself, almost like a mantra, and let emotional associations come up. And at the same time as you're doing that, try to find whatever imagery was in the what you read, and especially perhaps in what's standing out for you, and practice it imaginally, not imagining it in your head, imagining as if you were literally acting out the metaphor. So literalize it at first, act it out, and let your emotions associate, right? So I'll show you how to do this, but what you're doing is, in your imagination, you're acting it out, and you're emotionally associating with it. You're really reaching into how much of your ability to make sense of things it comes up from your body and how you're interacting with the world. And we've talked about this a lot in the course. Okay, so you've done enacted engagement, you've done embodied emotion. Okay, next you're going to do the existential ethical move. So what's the existential ethical move, the 3rd stage? The existential ethical is when you get a sense of what it's like, what's your perspective like, how is your world being shaped, right? What would it be like to live in this perspective that you've engendered in the first 2 stages, as if it became sort of your default mode of consciousness? What would it be like to live this way? How would you move around the world? Really try to get a sense of what it would be like as if this became a second nature perspective for you, not just one that you were realizing. So really let it soak in. This is the existential ethical. You're really trying to see what would this feel like as a way of life, a way of being, a way of seeing the world. And then that moves you very immediately to the 4th stage, which is the ecstatic, which literally means to stand beyond yourself. That's what ecstasy originally means, ecstatic, eternal. From that perspective, try to get an inkling, maybe even an insight. What is being disclosed to you about being? What is being disclosed to you about the world? And correspondingly, what is being demanded from you so that you can conform to that realization? Notice the word I'm using, to that realization. What is to be? Would you need to be transformed in order to conform to that deeper reality that is being disclosed to you? Okay, so let's review, and then I'm going to do it, and I'll talk you through what it's like for me. Again, you're not supposed to be having my experience. I'm modeling what it's like for me, so that you can then do it immediately when we're done today's session for yourself. Okay, so enacted engagement. Set the intention to resonate with the text, to be transformed in the reading. Read aloud. Let something catch you. Let something grab you. Okay. Embodied emotion. Emotionally resonate with that. Let emotions and associations come up with that. Also, whatever metaphors are in them, literalize them, actually as if you were to, enact them, right? Really pick that up. You're really enacting and embodying the emotion. Okay. Then the existential ethical. What would it be like if this way of seeing became a comprehensive way of being for you? If this was your comprehensive perspectival knowing? your default mode of consciousness. What would that be like? Try to imagine that. Get some sense of it. And then when you're within that, the ecstatic eternal, what's being disclosed to you? Maybe it's only an inkling. It might be a vague feeling. It might be an inkling. It might be a full-blown insight. Anywhere on the continuum is good. Okay? What's being disclosed to you about the world, about being? And correspondingly, what's being demanded from you? What's calling to you? What transformation, in order to come into a greater conformity with that deeper reality, are you seeing? Is coming to you, is calling you. Okay? So let's do it. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to have two texts. And what you do is you do the 4 stages with your poetry, because poetry is easier because it has imagery in it. It starts. And then you'll move to something more challenging, your prose, right? And then you do the 4. And then you'll notice that your mind naturally and spontaneously makes associations and connections, insights between the poetry and the prose. Let them talk to each other as a way of talking to you. Let them talk to each other as a way of talking to you. Let them talk to each other as a way of talking to you. Okay, so let's go through this. So how I would do this is I set myself, and what I do is I have these 2 objects. You've seen them before. This is a rock. This is important to me. This represents to me the whole Zen tradition, Buddhism and Taoism. This is the frog. This is the Neoplatonic tradition. I carry them around in my pockets. And I do that so that throughout the day, they remind me. They remind me of my aspiration. They remind me of my commitment. And then I enact them here. So I place them in front of me. May I resonate with this text? And I put myself into that state of reverence and that state of reading for transformation, not just reading for information. Now, I typically don't read very much. Some people read a lot. I find that when you read too much, it starts to get too many things are getting called up at once. So this is what I was reading today. This is Gerard Manley Hopkins. Okay. As kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rim in roundy wells, stones ring, like each tucked string tells, each hung bells. Bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same, deals out that being indoors each one dwells. Selves goes itself, myself, it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. So what called out for me here is that, finds tongue to fling out broad its name. So finds tongue to fling out broad its name. And so now that's really catching for me. Like finds tongue to fling out broad its name. And then I start to get emotional associations. I had an experience, a profoundly lucid, altered state of consciousness in which as I moved about the world, it was like everything was singing its name. I'm a tree, I'm a flower, I'm a blade of grass. And so this is coming to my mind right now, how everything is singing its name. And now I actually imaginal, as if I was moving around this room and that emotion is in me again and that memory, and everything is singing out its name. Everything is singing. And so I'm coming into the being mode with everything. Everything is singing its name and calling to me. And then I move into, what would it be like if that was my constant perspectival knowing, my way of being and seeing in the world? If I moved around the world and living my life, everything's seeing its name. Put aside practical thoughts, well, I can't live that way. Just what would it be like? What would it be like if I saw and related to everything, singing its name like Hopkins was talking there? Everything is singing its name. What would that be like? What's this being disclosed to me? I'm getting an inkling of how I would move into the being mode, of how everything would be so present, and that different kind of meaning that would be. And what's that calling from me? That's calling from me, I need to remember this. I'm so forgetful. I treat things in such a superficial way, and everything, even the inanimate things, are singing their name. What would it be like to live this, to get a sense of this? What's it demanding from me? What's it calling from me? And then I pick up the prose text. I think it's appropriate for this one. This is from Plato, and this is Socrates, somebody I aspire to. And what he's doing here is exemplifying the state of reverence that we're talking about. This is a dialogue between Phaedrus and Socrates. This is why Phaedrus is one of the characters in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, by the way. Phaedrus, this is at the end of the dialogue. But let us go now that it has become less oppressively hot. Socrates, shouldn't we first offer a prayer? Phaedrus, of course. Socrates, dear Pan and all you other gods who live here, grant that I may become beautiful within, and that whatever outward things I may be in harmony with the spirit inside me. And whatever outward things I have may be in harmony with the spirit inside me. May I understand that it is only the wise who are rich, and may I have only as much money as a temperate person needs. Is there anything else that we can ask for, Phaedrus? For me, that prayer is enough. Phaedrus, make it a prayer for me too, since friends have all things in common. Socrates, let's be going. So what that whole passage sings to me, but what comes out of this is, may I become beautiful within. So may I become beautiful within. What does that mean? What do I associate with that? How can I let go of older conceptions of just physical beauty? May I be beautiful within. What does that mean? There's difficulty and challenge with this reading, but there's also a longing here. May I be beautiful within. There's something there. There's something in what Socrates is talking about. I'm starting to touch it a little bit, even an inkling, isn't it? May I be beautiful within. What would it be like? What would it be like to see and be this way, as second nature, always in touch with that, being beautiful within? May I become more beautiful within. How does that softens me? It makes me more sensitive. But it's opening me up. But it's not it's not like the beauty that we see in our culture. It's not the self-aggrandizing. It's a humbling. It's connected with a kind of humility that you see in Socrates, the temperance that he meets, the beauty within, walking around the world living this way. What's disclosed about the world? There's a deeper sense of the beauty of things. And now I'm picking up again on how things are singing their name. And that beauty, that inner beauty, that I can only resonate with from my inner beauty. And there's a humbling and a reverence. I'm starting to come into a sense of what it would be like to remember this sati, to live this way. Two texts are talking to each other, the beauty and everything singing its name. So that's the practice. I did it a little bit quick here because we have limited time. But what we have here is, right, the enactive engagement. Recite it. Set your intention for transformation and reverence. Recite it. What catches? Then recite it again as you do emotional associations and you try the imaginal enactment. And then, right, the existential ethical. So enacted engagement, embodied emotion, then the existential ethical. What would it be like to live this way? To see my way of seeing and being was this way. And then the ecstatic eternal. What's disclosed to me? What's demanded from me? And let the two texts do that for each text. But in the second reading, let the two texts talk to each other so that they can talk to you. Then you can commit yourself to trying to remember this throughout the day. You can set the attention. May I remember and realize this again and again throughout this day. At some point, you may want to add to this by picking up an extra Dharma practice, which is study. So pick up a text that is written for spiritual transformation that also has commentary in it. So you're not, or at least is extended commentary. Right now, I don't recommend you doing this. I'm just giving you an example. This is some work by Plotinus. There's a translation, and then there's commentary at the back. You can get books where you can read through the Gospels, and there's commentary on it. For those of you who are interested in picking up on the Vipassana tradition, there's this wonderful trilogy, The Experience of Insight by Goldstein. Read them in this order. Seeking the Heart of Wisdom by Goldstein and Cornfield. Remember Cornfield and the Puppy Dog? And Insight Meditation, The Practice of Freedom. And this is by Goldstein. That trilogy is a very good trilogy you might want to pick up. You read these. You don't do Lectio Divina on these. You read these, but this is not just reading. You study. You read it, and you get the commentary, and you reflect. So this is reading and reflection. Okay, my students and my wonderful Sangha, that's practice. And what I'll do is, I think it would be good right now if we move towards just a couple of quick questions on Lectio, and then what you need to do. That's why I had you get the books. They're ready here. Sit again. Don't worry, you won't lose the instructions. I'm going to repeat them one more time, okay? But sit again, maybe just for 5 minutes. Then take your text, do Lectio on each one, and also how they talk to each other. This is called synthemata, and therefore how they can talk to you. So, enacted engagement, setting your intention for reverence and transformation. What catches you? Taking it up into embodied emotion. Repeat it again. Emotional associations, memories that come up, what's stirring in you. Enact the metaphor. Enact it. Enact it imaginally. Not inside your head, but as if in the world. Okay. Existential, ethical. What would it be like to live this way if this was your way of seeing and being? And then ecstatic, external, like ecstatic, eternal. What's being disclosed for you? You may have a feeling, an inkling, or full-blown insight. What's being disclosed to you about the world, and correspondingly, what's being demanded from you? What transformation to bring you into greater conformity with that disclosure? So a couple of questions. What is the poem book called again? The Enlightened Heart, an anthology of sacred poetry edited by Stephen Mitchell. The prose book is The Enlightened Mind, an anthology of sacred prose edited by Stephen Mitchell. Okay. Should we intentionally try to select contemporary poetry prose or let the associations emerge as a function of the practice? Pick something that intuitively calls to you. Yeah, try to pick up something that intuitively calls to you, and you're going to have to play with things for a bit, but don't be too much of a dilettante. Yeah, you have to commit to, once you've chosen a text, commit to it for an extended period of time, because this is going to ebb and flow for you. It's going to ebb and flow for you. Okay, everyone. So please, as soon as we're done today, go back into, right? At least find the core 4. Do some basic Vipassana, perhaps, maybe some basic metta, or maybe a little bit of prajna, however much time you have, and then immediately, you've got to do this immediately. Do the Lectio Divina. Okay. Thank you for joining, everyone. So let's review what we did yesterday, because last Monday was a Dharma day. We talked about a way of actually doing Dharma, part of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, a way of reading drawn from the Neoplatonic Christian tradition. This is called Lectio Divina. You pick two sources of text, some sacred poetry, some sacred prose. I'm going to review the process, but also if you check the notes from yesterday's class, from yesterday's lesson on Lectio Divina, it's entitled Lectio Divina, you'll find the stages of the practice described. You'll also find a list of books that are helpful. So for each text, you first set your intention. You set yourself to get into a state of reverence and reading for transformation. You're trying to resonate with the text. Once you set that, then what you do is you have enacted engagement. You read the text aloud and you try to associate with it. You try to feel it. You really just let it resonate in you. And what you're trying to do is notice anything in the text that catches your attention, calls out to you, even if you don't understand why. Something that grabs you. Then you move into the emotional embodiment, the second stage of the process. What you do that is allow yourself to, associated memories and especially emotions come up, and then any imagery any gestures, any postures that come up in connection with the reading. There might be imagery actually from within the reading. You engage in them imaginally. Imaginally doesn't mean you don't engage them inside your head. You project them as if you were interacting and enacting them in the world. This is embodied. Then you move to the existential ethics. What would it be like to live your life in this way of seeing and being comprehensively? What would it be like to live this way? What would that perspectival knowing as your sort of default setting in the world, what would that be like? And then that leads into the fourth and final stage, the ecstatic, which means to stand beyond yourself, eternal. What's being within that lived perspective, right? Within that world view, what would be disclosed about the world, and correspondingly, what would be demanded from you in order to conform to that realization? So you do that with the poetry. You repeat the same process with the prose. And when you're doing the prose, it'll happen usually spontaneously. This is called synthemata. That what happened with the poetry and the prose will talk to each other. Let them talk to each other as a way of talking to you. And then when you're done, express some gratitude and some resolution that you'll try to remember and realize what has happened to you throughout the reading. Remember, sometimes what comes, right, isn't a full-blown insight. It might be an inkling. It might be a feeling. It might just be a sense of reorientation. There's a wide continuum of responses you get from Lectio Divina. Strongly recommend that you do Lectio Divina after you do a sitting, right after. So I hope you have your books, your text chosen from yesterday, and I hope you practice it a bit yesterday. You do the sit. We will do the Q&A, and then hopefully right thereafter you can practice the Lectio Divina. Okay, so that's basically what we did. Tomorrow, so as I have more time, we'll have a slightly shorter sit, and I will do the Lectio Divina again with you. I will exemplify it for you again, and then we'll review it one more time on Thursday, and then that should be enough so you get some momentum going. All right, let's do some Lectio Divina together. So let's start with the sacred prose. Again, this is The Enlightened Heart, an anthology of sacred poetry. We'll start with the sacred poetry. The Enlightened Heart, an anthology of sacred poetry edited by Stephen Mitchell. Excellent translator. This is a poem by Rilke. Of course, it's translated from the German. Nevertheless, even in translation, I think it'll still sing to you. So, enacted engagement. I set my intention, coming into a state where I'm intending for reverence and I'm reading for transformation. Not to be cut off, not through the slightest partition shut out from the law of the stars. The inner, what is it if not intensified sky, hurled through with birds and deep with the winds of homecoming? So what calls out to me? Many times when I read this, different things call out to me in this poem. But today, what's calling out to me is hurled through with birds and deep with the winds of homecoming, the intensified sky, the innerness. There's a sense of, right, I'm picking up an association and I'm imagining a huge open sky, birds moving through it, and they speak, they exemplify the openness, the affordance of the sky, hurled through with birds, but the winds of homecoming, there's a remembering, there's a coming home. I can only get an inkling of it, but there's this sense of, when I connect to that innerness, there's an expansiveness, but there's a remembering, there's a homecoming. I'm getting an inkling for it, associations, a sense of what that's like, and there's something calling to me that, at the beginning of the poem now, not to be cut off, that longing to be deeply, deeply connected to the inner aspect of things, the depths of things, but it's also a remembering, coming home. What would it be like if that perspective, that state of being and seeing, became comprehensive for me? Way of life, that connectedness, that homecoming, that sense of the inner things, the intensified sky, hurled through with birds. What would that be like? What would I be seeing? What would be disclosed to me? What would be demanded from me? How would I need to transform to conform to what's being realized? How would I come into continuity of contact, a right relationship with this? The Sacred Prose, The Enlightened Heart, an anthology of sacred prose edited by Stephen Mitchell. This is from Philo. He's a Jewish Middle Platonist from around the time of Christ. He's considered by many people the first actual theologian. Today, and it's in quotes because he's referring to the word, today means boundless and inexhaustible eternity. Periods of months and years and of time in general are ideas of men who calculate by number. But the true name of eternity is today. Boundless and inexhaustible. So what calls to mind immediately is the shared fiction that it's Wednesday, that somehow there's Wednesday around me. But of course, there's no Wednesday. This is Odin's Day. Before we had the Norse interaction with the Norse, we didn't even have the term, and we didn't even cut up time like that. And when we were hunter-gatherers, we didn't even have the calendar. There's no Wednesday. But that doesn't mean there's no time in the sense of presencing. And can you sense it? Like the inexhaustibleness, the boundlessness that's here right now, always. And that always, but it's not a static always. It's a, right? It's the today, the here-ness, now-ness, right? That boundless, inexhaustible, but not static always. That's the true name of eternity. How appropriate for the fourth stage of Lectio, right? When we're trying to realize the ecstatic eternal. So I come into this. I'm already doing it. See, I'm already picking up on the terms, the inexhaustible, the boundless. I'm already seeing this. I'm enacting it. I'm doing it with you. I just did it. And then it's with that realization that just came. Sometimes it does that. It comes spontaneously. You don't even have to go through sort of explicitly the stages. They just unfold for you. And I get that sense, what he's talking about, of it, that the true name of eternity is today, but not the today of a Wednesday, but the today that was just disclosed to me. And what would it be like to live in the face of that disclosure, comprehensively, sati, always remembering it? What would that demand from me? What would I need to constantly remember? How could I conform more to this? What is needed? What is calling to me? How do I come into more of a conformity with eternity as the always but not static, inexhaustible, boundless today? And then how are those two now talking to each other? The symptomata, to not be cut off, the inner sky, the eternity. They're talking to each other, they're singing to each other for me. It's like it's palpable, it's a presence. And a sense of gratitude. I got to a place that I couldn't get to on my own. I got to a place because of the logos, of the texts. Gratitude for that, gratefulness. Try to commit myself to remembering throughout the day these realizations, to re-realize them, connectedness to the inner intensified sky, the homecoming, but also the today that is eternity. We want enacted engagement. We're going to recite the texts. We're going to set the intention. We're going to have a reverential, right? We're going to have reverence for the revelation, what's going to be revealed. We're going to trust to transformation. We're not just reading for information. So we're setting our minds for reverence and transformation. We're going to recite it out loud, right? And then we're going to move to, right, the what grabs us, what catches our attention, and then we're going to zero in the recitation, repeating that. When we move to, right, the embodied emotion, what associations come up with that? Right? What imagery, metaphorical, literal, can we enact imaginally, not in our head, but as if we were moving through the world? Embodied emotion. Until perspective, a way of seeing and being, takes shape. And then we move to the existential ethic. What would it be like to live this way? What would it be like if this was my default mode of being? The default way of seeing. And then that moves us to the ecstatic eternal. What's being disclosed about the world that I have not seen or have forgotten? And then what does that demand from me in order to, right, conform to it? What transformation do I need? How am I responsible to it? How can I respond to it by transforming myself? I'm going to depart slightly from the practice. I'm going to read the sacred poetry again from Stephen Mitchell. And you should always do poetry and prose, symptomata, and how they talk to each other is an important way in which they can talk to you. But I thought for the reading, I want to do something a little bit more challenging, because this is our third time doing this. And I wanted to pick up on something that other people, Kareem in particular, has been sort of zeroing in on. And this sets the practice into a broader context, because I want to give you a sense of how this practice, because as I keep saying, the touchstone for this is how you notice it, right, impacting, impregnating, transforming your life. So I've picked up Spinoza because he keeps coming up, and I don't think that's happenstance. I recommended a particular treatise to Karima, God, Humans, and Their Well-Being. But I'm just using this particular because it's a nice little book for carrying around. It's easily manipulable. So what I want to do is I want to, first of all, read the poetry, go through the practice with you, and go into the prose. Spinoza is challenging. He's challenging in many ways. He's challenging because he's one of the most logically rigorous. He's considered the greatest of the rationalist philosophers. Reading Spinoza is at time like reading a mathematical proof. So he's challenging that way. He's also challenging because he's right in the heart of the scientific revolution, and he's doing something that's very, very interesting. And many of you, I suspect, I hope you don't take this wrong, I hope you sort of maybe disagree a little bit with it. Because you're going to encounter in Lectio things that you don't initially agree with. So there's two things you can do, and this is why this is especially challenging. One is you can just get into argumentation with the philosopher. Now you should do that, but I think the correct practice for doing that is dialogos with somebody else. That's not. So then what we have to do is, if we're not going to specifically sort of argue with the philosopher, what does Lectio Divina mean for us in that situation? And what I'm going to try and show you is it means, right, don't get involved so much with the matter of what the person is saying as the manner. Try not to agree or disagree so much with what Spinoza is saying as try to see the perspective, adverbial. What would it be like to see the world the way Spinoza does, such that what he is saying makes sense and seems plausible. You still may reject it, of course. I'm not here to, surreptitiously try to convince you of things. At least I hope not. If that secret agenda is at work, I'm calling on whatever resources in me right now to challenge it and prevent it from being dominant. But what I want to show you is very often, and this is an important point for dialogos, we can come to learn and get a profound insight from people, even if we don't ultimately agree with them. And so that's why I chose this. It's challenging in two ways, because you need to read people who are going to challenge you, not just in the positive sense of, oh, that's wonderful, I hadn't thought about that before, but also in the sort of negative sense, oh, that's difficult, but I hadn't thought of that before. All right, so let's start. Let's start with some poetry. So this is from Ivavnuk, sorry for the mispronunciation. Ivavnuk, who is an Inuit shaman, and she wrote in the mid-19th to early 20th century. So I'm setting myself. Here's my, I mentioned that I set these before me as an act of setting my intention. I'm going to set myself for reverence, set myself for transformation. The great sea has set me in motion, set me adrift, moving me like a weed in a river. The sky and the strong wind have moved the spirit inside me till I am carried away, trembling with joy. So what's calling me there is moving me like a reed in a river. Moving me like a reed in a river. I can feel what it's like to be like on a boat, like in a kayak perhaps. And your perception does that shift where you feel the whole of the ocean moving beneath you, moving you. And you feel like a reed in a river. Not being damaged necessarily, but just that you feel this tremendous motion. And it resonates with her. It resonates, it moves her inside. There's a responsiveness that comes out. There's something that has an affinity to that outer motion. There's an inner outer motion. I'm sensing that affinity. What would that be like to move around the world, sensing that? The ocean of being, the way it's moving around me, but also through me. And not just through me like a foreign thing. That very movement within me is the movement that is me. What would it be like to live from that perspective? What's being disclosed to me about the world? What call for transformation would conform me to it? How can I wake up to it? Become more alive to it? Not a full-blown insight, just a sense for me today, an inkling of what that would mean. How I could start living this, but that I could only live it with a kind of transformation. So a tiny bit of background for Spinoza for some of the words he's going to use. It's important when you encounter people, like I said, make sure you've studied this for information before you read it for transformation. Spinoza is going to use words here like God and nature and idea. And he means something different than those sort of normally mean. When he's talking about nature, he's talking about how things move through space. He's talking about causation and energy, what we would now call energy, force. He's talking about God. He's talking about the patterns that give things their structural, functional organization, make them one with themselves, and in another sense, one with each other, such that I can make sense of them. He's talking about intelligibility. When he's talking about idea, he's not talking about just a thought in your mind, a representation. He's talking about that structural, functional organization that makes things knowable. And then what he says is, he always says God or nature. Because what he's trying to do is notice how we have traditionally put these in opposition to each other, part of that two worlds way of thinking. And there's value to this two worlds way of thinking. Paul Vanderklay was on my Discord server, and there's a recording, and you can go on YouTube and read it. And Mark from the Sangha asked him a question about that, and Paul gave an excellent answer. And you should go and listen to that. Listen to it carefully. Counterbalance what's being said here. But nevertheless, hear what is being said here as well. Because what Spinoza is saying is, what makes something act to be the way it is, and what makes it capable of being understood are just two different eyes, like your left and right field of vision. And what your brain does is it doesn't look at them and oppose them. It looks through them and beyond them into their depth, like what we do in prajna. So that's what Spinoza's talking about. That's what he's trying to get us to see. Because he sees that the scientific revolution, which is many people rightly criticized for flattening the world, getting rid of the two worlds, might also contain within it a real spiritual potential, which is the spiritual potential of seeing this deep depth. Okay, so you've read some information, you've got an informative understanding of Spinoza. Now you set yourself for reverence and for transformation. It's a fairly long reading. In itself, reason cannot fulfill us and make us happy. This is from probably the greatest rationalist of all time. That's what he's saying. Therefore, we must ask whether there is a particular kind of knowledge by which we could attain perfect happiness. The kind of knowledge that leads to happiness does not come from a source that is distinct from happiness to the mind. And as the mind perceives happiness, it becomes united with it. To put it another way, the knowledge of happiness evokes love for happiness. In turn, for love of happiness evokes love for its source, which we call God or nature. God cannot reveal himself directly to us, but only through his blessing. In receiving his blessing, we become united with him. In this union does our blessedness, our happiness consist. Thus, I do not say we must know God as he is, or even that we should know him adequately. It is sufficient to know him to some degree in order to be united with him. Even the knowledge we have of our own bodies is very particular. We do not know our bodies just as they are, yet we are totally united with our bodies. The knowledge of God is not the consequence of something else, but is immediate and direct. The knowledge of God is the cause of all other knowledge, and so must be acquired by itself alone. Moreover, by our very nature, we are united with God. So without him, we can neither exist nor be known. See that? The union with God is so close that it is evident we cannot know him except directly. The relationship of the soul to the body and of the divine idea to nature is one of love. We can observe this union by observing ourselves. The feelings within the soul are consistently finding expression in the actions and the movements of the body. The union of the soul with the body is one of total sympathy. And when we become fully aware of this union, we may truly say that we have been born again. See what he's doing? He's moving between religious and scientific language. So I'm picking up on that. And what part of the text is resonating with me? That last part really sings to me, because he's obviously alluding to Christianity, but he's doing something with it. There's even, so he's transforming something. And that's exemplifying a transformation that he's calling to me with. The union of the soul with the body is one of total sympathy. And when we become fully aware of this union, we may truly say that we have been born again. Sympathy here doesn't mean feeling sorry for someone. It means being in total affinity, total attunement, resonant at one-ment. And when we become fully aware of this union, we may truly say that we have been born again. We may be born again, really waking up. So the way the mind and the body are united in a profound kind of love, that not just that I have, but a love that makes me who I am, a love I participate in, is the same kind of love I can have for God or nature. They are the same in some deep way. One is a lived metaphor for the other. I can sense this. So I'm trying to enact it, trying to really enact it. What does this mean? So what's coming up for me in this emotional is when I'm moving in Tai Chi, and the distinction between mind and body and me and world breaks down, not into some amorphous thing, but into this, like that, what he's saying, this vibrant love, this sympathy. I'm sensing this, and I'm taking this as, this is what he's calling me to. This is what he's calling me to. He's trying to get me to see that these two ways of seeing that we normally opposed, I can actually see through them. I can be born again. I can see through them. Now I'm falling into a wordless silence. I'm just speaking to share with you because I'm getting a sense of what he means. Somehow beyond these, right? Deeper than the separations is that which grounds the things that have been separated. Deeper than mind and body, deeper than self and world, deeper than God and nature. All of these, see what he's doing? I can feel it. I can feel it. I don't just mean like a feeling, I mean the texture and taste of my mind and the way my energy is moving and the way my body is coming alive to me and the way the world feels almost tangible and palpable to me. It's like it's vibrating. I think I have a sense, an inkling of what it is, not to agree with Spinoza, but to see Spinozistically, to see the way Spinoza saw, see what he's offering me and what he's affording me. Now I feel the two talking to each other. This abstract scientific philosopher, this Inuit shaman, and the seed of being, God or nature. They're not the same, but they're not different. I hope that was helpful to you. So you've had 3 different instances, 3 different texts, 3 different, this one is more challenging. I've tried to demonstrate and exemplify to you what Lectio Divina is like. Now notice what you could then do. This is something that came up in my discussion with Guy Senstock. It's going to come out in today's Dialogos, Voices with Vervaeke. How once you've done the Lectio on Spinoza, you still might have philosophical disagreements, but now your disagreement comes from a profound place of understanding, so that you have, hopefully, respect, to see things properly. Spect, res, to see the thing properly. You see it properly. You have true enacted respect. And then you can enter into deep dialogos with Spinoza, even disagreement. And Lectio would bleed into Dialogos.